Hi, I'm Dr. Paul with Secrets of Chiropractic Success, and today we're going to go over office designs, the three basic types of office designs that will determine essentially your flow, your profitability, efficiency, your overhead. So we're going to go into those, and what are the parallel factors that will affect those? So let's go into these again. I'm Dr. Paul. I've opened 77 offices in 20 states, speaker, three chiropractic colleges. I specifically help chiropractors create a highly profitable practice, looking at all the major categories of a practice itself, from and then from there into how to create freedom lifestyle through associate doctors, to creating wealth through investing in real estate, knowing tax strategies, and asset protection. So that's what we do. Again, so let's go ahead and talk about these office designs. There's essentially three types of designs that you're going to be paying attention to that make all the difference in the world with profitability. And when I started my practice, I didn't know any of this, so I started with the worst kind of design, and then I was forced to go into the second best because of my growth, and then I was forced to go into the best for efficiency and profitability. So let's go into each one of these. So what's the worst design? What are the three designs we're going to go into, and why is one better or worse than the other, and how it's totally relevant to what you're practicing. So first is the worst design. The three designs are the closed offices design. Second one is the hybrid design, some closed office, some open space. And then the best is the open space design. So remember, when we talk about profitability, and that's where we're going to focus on. So we're not going to be paying attention to philosophy or in any particular therapies you want to do. We're just going to focus on what are the best office designs for high efficiency, low overhead, high profitability. That's what we're looking. That's where we're focusing when we're talking about this. So let's go into the closed office space design first. And it's the absolute worst case scenario you can have. And this was big back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You even see some offices like that in the 80s. I can go into an older chiropractor's office, and they still have individual rooms for everything. Okay, let me just share with you a couple of reasons why that's really bad. First, you have the most amount of wasted space. That's the number one reason. Every time there's a 90-degree angle, every time you put a wall together and there's a 90-degree angle, you're wasting about 1.5 to 2 feet out from that space. In other words, people won't go right up to a corner and use that space. It's dead space, easily for about 1.5 up to 2 feet. And then 6 feet, or excuse me, about 8 feet. Most ceilings are about 8 feet high. So you get about 2 feet coming out from every 90-degree corner to about 8 feet high. That's how many square feet at every 90-degree corner you're absolutely losing. You're paying for it, but you're not using it. So that's why when you go into individual rooms, that's one of the main reasons. That's one of the worst setups, is when you go into these individual rooms, you have a ton of wasted space in all four of those corners. And that adds up quickly. Go ahead and put 3, 4, or 5 rooms together, add that space up. You could easily be talking about 2, 3, 400, 500 square feet of space that you're paying for that's just absolutely wasted. So that's number one, is wasted space. Number two is efficiency. That's when doctors get trapped in the room. When they go into these individual rooms, and one of the worst things they do when they go into these rooms is they shut the door behind them. You're creating a visual barrier and an obstruction to get out now. You're just telling the patient to keep talking to me. And a lot of doctors don't know how to break from the patient politely and cleanly. And they'll sit there and engage in conversation. And that's a practice killer. Remember, you have limited time when you exchange your time for money in a chiropractic office, and you do not have 8 hours. You have what's called industrial hours. So you don't have from 9 to 6 o'clock, typical office hours. You got from 4 to 6 after work. You got the morning typically from 9 to 10:30 roughly. no more than 11, and then very small peak right in the early afternoon. That's it. You only got about 4 hours a day. So you don't have 8. So you got to be highly efficient in the time periods that you have. And you're not going to be able to change people's schedule. I always say that's like you opening a breakfast restaurant, you deciding, you know what, I'm not going to open it until 2 in the afternoon, and then I'm going to close at 6. Well, you're not going to get very much business at all because people eat breakfast. It's called industrial hours. They eat breakfast in the morning, not at 2 in the afternoon. So we got to pay a lot of attention to efficiency to increase our productivity. So number one, it's a space killer, and space is your largest reason for high overhead. Now, it's not the highest overhead item in a chiropractor's office. Typically, labor is. Labor in a chiropractic office is typically about 13 to 15%. Space is about 7%. But what happens, the more it's an overhead killer because you go to fill the space. Not only do you have that dead space that you're paying for, but you'll fill it. And I see this all the time. And it's called Parkinson's law. When you have space, you'll just go to fill it. That's, go look at your house. Every space you have, you went and put stuff in it. So you got to heat it, you got to air condition it, you got to clean it, you got to maintenance it. There's going to be equipment in there. And you don't think that adds up, but it does. So the cost per square foot is not what the lease says. So that's like you can take a running office, divide in the overhead into the cost per square foot. And that's the true cost per square foot. It is not empty space. That's why when I've opened offices before and they were too big, we took the end rooms and we locked them. We shut the vents off, turned the blinds down, and we locked them. We didn't want to be spending all that time. And it's not just space, it's also efficiency. That's like I just was consulting with a doctor. His staff was running around everywhere. Well, why? He had a 3,000 square foot space, and instead of cutting it in half, he built it out. So he spent all this money. He spent over $100,000 building out the space, number one. And then he did the second mistake. He put individual rooms in, so that killed the utilization of space and the efficiency of the space. So it cost him money to build it out. He decreased his efficiency, and it cost more in overhead. And that was one of the big problems he was having. He couldn't do anything. His staff was running around everywhere. He had terrible efficiency. And so these were some of the reasons why he hired me. So I looked at the layout in his plan, and to me, it was simple to see. But that's what happens. Doctors just start using the space. And I'm like, no, you need to increase your efficiency with the space you have. And then if you do have that extra space, just lock it off. Or in his case, I showed him how he could easily put a wall up and he could rent out that other space because it had another entranceway in and out, and he had a big enough parking space. So instead of that 1,500 square space that he's laid out, paying for, and just terrible efficiency, he did it, by the way. He went in, put the wall up, and then he just rented it out. And then we looked at his existing space. See what he did, and this is real common what happens. It's called Parkinson's. He took all his equipment and he spread it throughout 3,000 square feet instead of doing what I call overlapping. And I'll talk about this when I hit the third space. You'll have the highest efficiency when you take your space and you use it for multiple functions, not just for an exam or not just treatment or not just therapy. And I'll talk about that in a second. And that's how you get high space utilization. So again, back to me, I started with 800 square feet, and this was before I didn't know anything. So I started relatively small, which was great, but they were individual rooms. So I didn't know any better. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So you went in, basically that was the waiting room. Next to that, that was another room. I put the CA in, then you walked into the hall, and essentially there were 3 rooms. That's what it was. Well, for starting a practice and my cost, it was fantastic. But I grew out of that unbelievably fast. Well, I didn't move. I had to rearrange things. I had to take walls down, stuff like that. And we'll talk about that. Okay, so what's the number one reason you don't want individual rooms? Wasted space. Number two, space is your highest overhead, not on a percent base, but because of Parkinson's law, you'll just go to fill it. Number three, unbelievable, terrible efficiency. And I can just cite example after example after example of space and layout. I even had a doctor put his reception area right in the middle so patients could walk around each side. Well, that was totally wasted space. I mean, we had two associate doctors and we'd see between 300 and 400 patient visits a week. And we had no problem with one hallway, them getting in and out. That's called efficiency. It's called good systems and efficiency. I walked in there and I couldn't believe it. He had this huge, so essentially had two huge waiting rooms, off to the right, off to the left. And I just told him, I said, I'd block off this whole left-hand side and I'd create space out of that, utilized space out of that. And then when he built it, he had a terrible design. And unfortunately, he didn't design it. He actually hired a chiropractic design company. He spent over $100,000. Now, most doctors don't have $100,000 to throw in the build out. And by the way, build out is unbelievably expensive. That'll typically be the largest expense when you start a practice is the build out. We can start a practice for under $7,000 in total equipment, clinical equipment, and administrative equipment. But you can spend a lot of money on build out. And then so he had huge waiting room, basically two hallways going around the central. Now it looked fantastic, but it was unbelievable wasted space, high cost, low efficiency. And that's another, he hired me again because he was stuck at 70 visits a week. It wasn't just space, it was knowledge and skill, but he was going to have a hard time with that kind of layout. And then when he built out the back, they were all individual rooms, the highest cost, lowest efficiency. And what did he do in those rooms? He put equipment all the way in them, all the way to the back. So he had to run his butt off. So he didn't even proportionally design it where called the 80-20 rule. And I'll go into that in a second, but you put the space in the front is where you put the things that you do 80% of the day. And that's regular adjustments and therapies. And when people come in and out, that's where you put it the front. You put it in the very back, going back proportionally, what you do least of. And that's typically, the bathroom's typically in the back and typically x-rays. You're not typically using an x-ray every 20 minutes in your office. So those are kind of the things that go toward the back. So that's why you do not want individual space. And then the doctor will go into the room and shut the door. That's the worst thing you can do is shut that door. That's why if you're old enough, you remember bank tellers when you used to walk into a bank teller in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and even early 90s, and about the mid 90s, they changed this. You would walk in and they had individual cubicles for the bank teller. They had like stations. You walk in, there was you couldn't see to the person to the left or right of you, and it was just you and the teller. Well, guess what happened? What they found out? The time spent with the teller was enormous. Why? The person didn't have any reason to leave. They would take their time and talk, and they would talk about a lot of other things besides banking. So what did the banks do? And you see this kind of everywhere now. They ripped out those stations. Now, when you walk in and you see the teller, it's just one wide open area. Well, guess what that does to the client? It kind of forces them not to sit there and talk about personal items. It kind of forces them to kind of think to yourself unconsciously, you're at the teller, you're not going to be talking about a whole lot of personal things when it's out in the open. And if there's somebody behind you, you're not going to sit there. You're going to, if you have any decency, you're going to kind of know to get your business done and move on because you don't want people behind you waiting. See, that's what happens. These are time. This is just tapping into natural human dynamics is what it is. So I go into some offices, and I just went into another one the other day, and it was an older chiropractor though, and he had all individual rooms. And then the worst thing you could do is therapy in the rooms. So you now locked up, you do the adjustment, you're tied up in there, and then you do the therapy, That whole space is tied up for maybe 20 to 30 minutes. I just talked with a doctor on the phone the other day. He invested in a joint. They got a really efficient layout, open layout. And that's what one of the complaints he had. He goes, we're not like the typical chiropractor where you go in there and you spend 20 or 30 minutes and you lay on the table, and he does the rubby dubby and you talk to him for a while. See, you can't do that with any type of high efficiency, because why? You've got industrial hours. There's only so many people you can fit in from 4 to 6 after work. And they're not going to take off work 3 times a week, twice a week to come into your office or in the morning. See, so market forces dictate this. The doctor won't. So a lot of those offices I went into, and the very first thing that I did is I looked around, I looked at the flow, and I remember one doctor I went into, and he didn't have any. It was I think he had just 3 rooms. Well, you're very limited with how many people you can see with 3 rooms. You're going to be stuck in there, the cost, everything. And he couldn't see it. Well, I walk in and I see this big waiting room. There's a couple wasted spaces in an office. Waiting room is the most wasted space. There's no productivity happening in a waiting room. The doctor's office, there's no productivity in the doctors. I see doctors with big offices and a big desk. I'm like, that's crazy. And then they'll have a staff lunchroom. I'm like, not only are you wasting space, you're telling them, not to get to work. I mean, that's just crazy. So anyway, I walked into this doctor's office, and again, we look at all these limiting factors that will limit the growth. Well, that's one of them. Your space and your layout's one of them. And I look around, I go, well, this is easy. I said, let's just put a visual barrier. So when you walked into the waiting room, you walked into this side. This was the front entrance. You walked in this way, and he had more space than he had the receptionist here, and then a hall. And then he had a lot of space on the other side of the hall. And he had all of that as waiting room space. I couldn't believe it. And this doctor's not seeing many patients at all. You can't see that many patients with 3 rooms. And then I said, well, this is going to be easy. I said, we're just going to put a visual barrier right here, and we're going to make that the therapy bay. And then you're just going to adjust out of those rooms. You're not going to keep them in there for 20 minutes. And just like that, the practice shot up. So that's one of the best things you can do to increase your efficiency, is put in a therapy bay. And I am not, and we'll go into, that's the second model that I'll go into here next. So individual rooms. Now, what you want to pay attention to is what's called structural walls. It's very inexpensive to take a wall down. Now, it depends even if there's plumbing in it, or there's electrical or duct work, because that's what costs money, especially when you're putting up walls. If you put up plumbing, that's expensive in the wall, or electrical into the wall, or duct work, that's expensive. That's where there's big expenses of putting in rooms. But a lot of times these rooms, you can take down a structural wall. And I've done that a lot. I did that in my office, but I do that with a lot of clients. I walk in and I kind of look at everything for efficiency. I said, well, this is easy. I said, let's just take this wall down. And immediately it opens everything up. And it not only opens up room to room, it opened up the 4 feet in the hallway. So that hallway space became visual utilized space. And it just created a huge open area for therapy bays, which is the single greatest thing you can do to increase your efficiency. That's number one, is make sure you have a therapy bay. Don't do one-offs. Go in a room one-on-one. Bad space, bad efficiency. You get stuck in there, low utilization. It's the worst thing you could do. So I look for these non-structural wall, or if it's a structural wall. It's very expensive to move a structural wall. So we don't even fool with it. If it's a structural wall, now if it's plumbing or electrical or ductwork, it's pretty easy to cap that off. So it's much less expensive just to cap it off, take it down and cap it off, than it is to put it in. And I have a lot of doctors that can't see that. I moved to one doctor and he goes, I got too many people waiting. And of course, that's a practice killer. As soon as people wait, that's the end of your growth. So we evaluated all of his systems and we looked for the stopcock. Well, it turns out the big stopcock was the therapy. He only had 3 therapy stations. And then but he couldn't see, he had a psychographic barrier. He couldn't see how to open it. I go, well, this is easy. So I had him send me the layout, the walls, the dimensions. I go, well, this is easy. We'll just take this wall down right here. I mean, you can have a handyman come in and do it for $300, $500, take the wall out. That's real. And then just put trim around it. And, that's real easy to take a wall down. I said, just take that wall down, and you just opened up and created another 2 therapy stations, 5. And with 5 therapy stations, depending on the therapy you're using, you can increase, you can go from 3 therapy stations will typically get you up to about 120, 130 visits a week with nobody waiting. And again, that depends on the type of therapy you're using also. And then he went from 3 to 5 therapy stations. And just like that, he shot up another 50 patient visits in no time, just like that. Okay, so hopefully we drove the point home about space. So even if you get stuck in a place where there's individual walls, you can look to take it down, okay? Now, so we're talking about cost, efficiency, and let's go to the second category, which is the hybrid space. And that's pretty good. And that's when you have the individual rooms. So there's some privacy for the adjustment, exams, report of findings, things like that. So you may have 1, 2, or 3 of those. And then you have a therapy bay. That's really good. You'll definitely see way more patients doing that. And by the way, that's kind of an example. I went into one doctor. He was in a home office and he was stuck. He was like seeing 30, 40 patient visits a week. I looked at his layout. I'm like, no wonder. He had only 3 rooms, and he did use the 3rd room. He had an x-ray machine. He used it as an overflow. But he was doing even terrible therapies. He was putting people on hydroculators. That's 1960. You don't even get paid for that. It's a huge, because remember, we're paying attention to space, labor, and equipment. Those are the big 3: space, labor, and equipment. They don't go alone. We're talking about space, but they don't go alone. So he had the equipment in there. It was huge labor. Took him a lot. It takes a lot of time to put people on and off hydroculator, put the towels up, and then he had an area that had to dry them out. And what a nightmare. What a nightmare. And so I said, number one, you don't need to be doing anything in our office you don't get paid for. Number one, times maybe more valuable than that. You can exchange out that service for a service you get paid for. So he got rid of the hydroculator tables. I'm like, okay, great. And then I go, okay, we need to, now in this situation, it was a home, but he was in an ideal situation because his opening was in the back where he came through, and there was very little space. And then in the kitchen area, he made that to see air, and then he walked down the hall and there was the 3 rooms. But if you walk to the left, there was the dining room. He was using the living room area as a waiting room area. The largest space in his office, he was using for the most wasteful thing you could do. And he couldn't see it. I go, well, this is easy. I said, we're going to turn this into the therapy bay. I said, we only want 2 chairs in the waiting room. The only time somebody should be sitting in the waiting room is when they're filling out papers. So we do not want more than 2 chairs and very much small amount of space. And you don't even need that. You can, they can come right in, have no waiting room at all, right to the receptionist. And then in the hall area where there's the therapy bay, that's a wide open space. So we typically will put chairs right there, and the new patients will sit there and fill out the paperwork, which is way better. They like it a lot more because remember, when they're out in the front, they're waiting, even though they're filling out paper, they're waiting. But as soon as they come into the back, they're not waiting anymore. They know that it's go time. As soon as they fill this out, it's go time. But this is a paradigm shift. You got to think differently. You got to see differently. So, but that's what we did with him. We just put 2 chairs there. We increased the efficiency of his office because we'd rather have him on therapy than in the waiting room. Because remember, that's the #1 complaint in the doctor's office, and 12 minutes is the minimum before they start complaining. That's like the practice killer. That's number one. You can never have anybody wait. So you come in, we put 3 therapy bays, and it just so happened that right next there was just a little overhang wall to the front door, and he wasn't using it. So we just kept it locked, and we put another therapy. So there was essentially 4 therapy bays. He went from 3 rooms, only 3 stations to see patients, to 7. He more than doubled his efficiency just by being smarter in space layout. That's it. So take these into consideration when you're looking at your space. The single best thing you can do, number one, to increase your efficiency is have a therapy bay. Number one. And now actually number one is being more efficient, have a higher knowledge and skill level individually, know how to get in and get out of a room. A lot of doctors don't know how to, they don't know how to control the conversation, cut the conversation, move the patient. They don't, that's a big problem. So doctors end up sitting in developing really bad habits, getting stuck in a room talking to patients. And I have clients tell me that all the time. They go, I didn't know how to leave. The patient kept talking. He goes, I didn't know how to leave without being, discourteous. I'm like, no, I'll show you exactly the steps you do to do the 1 to 3 minute adjustment. Because that's all it's about. The adjustment should only take like no more than 3 minutes. That's all the typical adjustments you take. Everything else is just talking. So, and it's usually about totally irrelevant things. And that's the patients. I always say, patients don't come in, they don't buy a friend. They're not coming to your office because they're buying a friend. And that's a whole nother topic with doctors trying to befriend the patient instead of going for respect. But that's a whole nother topic. So back to the hybrid office, you come back to the hybrid office, and that's a good layout. You can see a lot of patients depending on your therapy stations. Usually up to, again, it depends on your therapies too, whether they're attended, unattended, whether you have a therapist or don't have a therapist. So these are other peripheral factors, but it will open up dramatically as soon as you have a therapy. And the bare minimum stations you need is 3. You need 3 therapy. You never can buy one piece of equipment. You never. I see that happening a lot. Doctors buying like one-offs. Like, you can't do that. Because as soon as 2 people need it and they come in and within the relatively same time somebody's using it, they're waiting. What does that mean? You just stopped. You just stopped the upside and the growth of that channel. You just totally stopped it. So you never can have just one therapy, ever. You need a minimum of 3. And again, it depends what it is. Because some of these therapies are, my God, the space they take up, some of these disc decompressions. I walked into one doctor's office and he had a pretty big room, but it only fit is this decompression therapy table and another one because the disc decompression was huge. So it took up a huge amount of space. It was costly and it was labor intensive. It takes a lot of time to hook somebody up and to unhook them. I mean, that whole area was dead. I mean, I could have run 3 times as many patients through that space as what he was doing with 1. So these are all major considerations. Now, again, if you're moving real slow and you're seeing 40, 50, 60 visits a week, you don't notice anything. I always say it's like driving a car. You drive a car 5 miles an hour and all the tires are out of line, you won't even know it. Go ahead and take it up to 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. Matter of fact, it won't even let you. And that's what happens with offices, with space. That it doesn't matter how good you are, how many new patients you get, what your patient retention is, the space can be a killer. It can be a killer for efficiency and cap you. And that's why I say, I always look, was anybody waiting? And that's what we had. We had a no wait rule. When they came in, they signed the papers and they were not allowed to turn around and sit down. They were required to come back. And when regular visitors came in, as soon as they signed in, they were not allowed to turn around and sit down. That's a huge negative experience. Now, it takes good systems. It takes a good layout. It takes a lot of efficiency. It takes good systems to do that. But that's what we're constantly paying attention to, is that experience. So that patient can literally just walk in, sign in, go right back, get their 3-minute adjustment and leave if they need to, or come over and get therapy and immediately start therapy and leave. So that experience it's a tremendous service experience for that patient. So anyway, going back to the therapy base. So you need a minimum of 3 stations to get up to about 120, 130 visits a week. And that's a pretty good efficiency. And that's with a therapist doing therapy. If the doctor is still trying to put people on and off therapy, or if the doctor, and I see this a lot, which is terrible, the doctor's having the front desk person run back and forth. You're not going to grow a practice that way. It's called systems. They should have their system. And usually when I found it's not because there's high, it's usually because the doctor's taking his time writing notes. In other words, he's not very efficient. He didn't finish with the notes, the soap notes, right at the time of that visit. And so now he's just taking time. He typically goes back into his office and fools on the computer. And then he makes the front desk person stop what they're doing and come back and take them off, therapy when the bell rings or whatever. That's terrible and terrible inefficiency. It's terrible. You can't grow practice like that. You can't grow practice by everybody running around with their head cut off. So there's some other factors, how long is it you're doing therapy? How labor intense is it to put somebody on and off therapy? Are you going to have to move somebody else from their station and what they should be doing full time to stop what they're doing to come back and do therapy? That's the most common reason I told you. Doctors usually are just a little lazy. They take their time. And, and these are doctors that think they're going to grow their practice. Well, you're not going to grow your practice doing that. So, I would say the doctor should do everything, putting them on and off, all the clinical parts up until highs, whether it's a part-time that comes in during the industrial hours for helping people on and off therapy, or full-time, not only to help with therapy, to help with the marketing. The doctor should be doing all of that unless he's doing an exam or a report, exam, patient education, re-exam, re-report, reportify, something that takes a little more time. That's the only time that front desk person should come back and put somebody on or off therapy. That's it. And again, these are all systems. These are all systems that increase efficiencies, increase productivity, decrease overhead, all that stuff. Okay, so you want a minimum of 3. Usually you need more than 3 therapy stations when you get to, if you want to go over 120, 130. You usually can get up to like 170 visits with 4 therapy stations. If you want to max out the doctor's exchange of time for money, and I found that to be between 180 and 220 visits a week. Physically, emotionally, doctor can see. Now that's if they have the knowledge and skill. Most doctors don't have that knowledge or skill to actually build a business that high. Because the national average is 107. Most doctors are only at 50% of their capacity. So if they were at capacity, I found it's usually between 180 and 220 visits a week when they're efficient. They know what they're doing, they're efficient. They know how to move, they know how to talk, all that kind of stuff. So having said that, you go, how many therapy stations do you need? Well, you're going to need about 6 to max out your exchange of time for money. And that's what we had about 6 therapy stations, and we had 2 associate doctors, 6 therapy stations. We didn't have anybody wait. So we paid a lot of attention to these systems. So that's the hybrid model. So you come in and there's individual rooms. And a lot of doctors, the number one reason they do that is, to be honest with you, it's low confrontation. They don't like adjusting the patient in an open area. Or, and I hear this a lot, which is terrible, they'll go, oh, I got a few patients that don't like that. Well, guess what? You replace those with people that are okay with it. You never let a small group of people dictate a negative in your business. Never. You let them go. You replace them. Now, to do that, you got to come from a position of strength, not weakness. It reminds me, one time I had a doctor who's only seeing 70 visits a week, so he's not very strong. He didn't know very much. And one patient came in and complaining, and they were leaving, and he was panicking because he was losing a regular patient. I said, don't worry about it. We're going to show you how to keep patients, how to get them. I said, well, and very shortly, you're going to thank me that you're not dealing with that kind of attitude. Well, we took him from 70 visits a week within 60 days to 140 visits. And in 6 months, he's at 200 visits. So 6 months, I asked him later, I said, how'd you like that guy? Would you like him to be one of your regular patients again? He goes, no way. So you went from a position of weakness and not having the knowledge or business skill to us training him to he knew how to training him to where he knew how to keep patients, he knew how to get patients. He came from a position of strength, not weakness. Most doctors don't. So they're letting the patient dictate. That's unfortunate. So you don't have to be that way, by the way. So anyway, these are all just examples I see all the time. So anyway, that takes you up. So if you get about 6 therapy stations, you're good to go. You can have 1 to associate doctors. You can see 300, 400 visits a week. That's more than a lot of doctors ever want to see anyway. Or a lot of doctors don't even want associate doctors. So you're fine. But even if it's just you, you're still going to have a certain amount of tables. So remember, the key is nobody can wait. That's the key. Nobody can wait. That's when you have no more growth. If somebody's waiting and you're seeing 60 visits, you got a lot of bad things going on. You got either space, labor, equipment, knowledge, skill, motivation, HR, resource problem. You got one of those 7 problems. Okay, so that's the hybrid. So that's the best scenario. Is the hybrid is the individual, or the second best is the individual. So maybe you have 1, 2, preferably 2 rooms. And the rooms you do adjust out of, they're multi-purpose rooms. You don't just adjust somebody in a room. So as an example, when we went ahead and increased our rooms, we not only did the adjustments out of them, we did the exams out of them, consultations out of them. We did the reports out of them, the re-reports, the re-exams. So you could go into any one of those 3 rooms and do 5, 6, 7 different services. Say, that's the way you always want to overlap space. So that's the way that worked out. So we overlap that space, which decreases the space needed, decreases the labor needed. Remember, space, labor, and income are your overhead killers, are your profit killers. So we decreased the space needed, we decreased the labor needed, we decreased the equipment needed. High efficiency. And then we had a nice therapy bay. This was the second tier. We had a nice therapy bay. We started with 3 stations, and then I didn't fool around going from 4 to 5. I just went from 3 to 6. And that was enough for 2 doctors seeing over 300 patient visits a week with nobody waiting. So, and we did passive therapies and active therapies. We did both. Okay. So, and again, that's a whole nother topic for another day. So that is the hybrid station. And you can have you can have some small space. You can have 800, 600 square feet. I always say you can even have professional space, 2 small rooms if they're next to each other, already built out. And one is like where the doctor does the adjusting, patient education and all that. And the next room is your therapy bay. So you can have 2 kind of medium-sized rooms already built out and unbelievable high efficiency. Remember, space is the killer for overhead. Everything gets filled up in that space. It's a killer. You want to do everything you can to have the lowest amount of space, highest design, layout, and efficiency possible. That's not what happens when doctors don't have it. They just start spreading out. It's called Parkinson's law. Okay, so that's the second level. And then the absolute best level is the open adjusting area and the open therapy bay area. So yeah, let's say you have your 6 therapy bay stations. So you got plenty of space for people to come back, get adjusted, or go on therapy and get adjusted. So you got plenty. Because remember, and I say this all the time, so we had 6 therapy stations. We had 3 rooms. And so I told my staff, I said, how many people can we book at the exact same time? So that's 6, 7, 8, 9. So if 9 people came in, none of them were in the waiting room, and they all were in a room getting ready to getting worked on, or starting therapy. You get the point. I said, so how many people can we schedule on the exact same hour? And they said 9. I go, no, 27. Well, how'd you get 27? So we scheduled 27 people at the exact same time, up to 27 people. You got to be able to do that because it's called industrial hours. You got limited time to see people, and Most of the time it's 4 to 6 after work. You got to be ready to roll, unbelievably efficient. So I go, well, how did you come up with 27? I came up with 27 because 27 people are not going to show up at the same time. You're going to have a third of them come in early. You'll have about a third of them come in on time. And you'll have about a third of them come in late. Well, that's no big deal if I'm only spending 1 to 3 minutes adjusting a patient. That's no big deal. Well, if you're in that room 10, 15 minutes with a patient, you got a problem. You can't do that. You won't even be able to schedule, more than 2 people at the same time without somebody waiting. Because remember, as soon as somebody waits, you're killing your business. You're killing it. Okay. So, because you think of it, do you want to go somewhere 3 times? Now, you don't mind going somewhere and waiting a while if it's once. Do you want to go somewhere 3 times a week, twice a week, and have to wait 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes? I would say to the doctors are only aware of their time. I said, no, the average time somebody drives to and from work is 23 minutes. So it took them 23 minutes to get to you, 23 minutes to get home. How long did they wait in your office? Did they wait 5, 10 minutes? So they're already at 23 and 23 is 46. They're already at 46 minutes going out of their way for you. They're going out of their way. They didn't wake up in the morning going, man, I can't wait to get to the chiropractor's office and spend $50 or $100 and do it 3 times a week. It's not why they wake up. They're going out of their way for you. So if you add, that's 20, 40, 46, let's say you make them wait 10 minutes, 56 minutes. They're already close to an hour because of you. And you want them to do it 3 times a week. And then depending how long are you spending with them adjusting? Are you like in there for 10 minutes? I remember I went into one doctor's office and monitored everything. And the CA, it was every afternoon during the main days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The CA always had to go back to the room because patients were coming in. She had to go back in the room and knock on the door. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. That was the clue to the doctor. Get the hell out of there. Get moving. We got people waiting. You're not growing a practice. You can't grow a practice. Mother Nature will, remember, Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. What does that mean? It means it'll fill where the void is. It will not fill where there's not a void. You always have to have a void in your practice to grow it. Always. Void meaning that they can come in and go and get out. That's what that means. So anyway, going back to the open space. So you have the open adjusting area. So you have your therapy. And then what I always say is just have visual barriers. You can have plants, like if you have a big open room, a lot of times you want to use visual barriers because a lot of open space can look empty and you don't want an empty feeling. So I say use visual barriers so you can and I like plants. Plants really work good as visual barriers and scenery, color. And I never use real plants. You just created more work for somebody. So I always had plastic plants. So you can have plants that come up from the floor, like little trees, come up like 3 feet, 4 feet, something like that. Or you can have plants hanging from the ceiling like ferns that come down. Or you can have a combination of a plant coming up and a plant coming down and just spacing them. That's a great visual barrier. It looks good too. It looks fantastic. But it kind of breaks things up a little bit visually. So that's why I would say, so the best, most efficient, highly productive facility is the therapy bay. And then just right next to it, you just have maybe a visual barrier and then have at least 2 tables with chairs. And then the patients are taught when they come in, if one of the tables is empty, lay down on it, let the muscles relax. So before the doctor works with you. So then you have those 2. So again, how many people can come back in that situation? You got 6, 7, and then you want like at least 2 to 4 chairs minimum. So if they come back and anybody's on the adjust, they just sit down because they know it's going to only take a minute or 2. Because remember, patients won't talk to you as much about all their personal items and hold you when it's open and they know somebody else is away. First, just because it's open, that alone will stop them from just talking about personal stuff. But especially when somebody's waiting, I mean, it's just common courtesy. That's even you adjust somebody and they get up and they start talking. As soon as somebody comes back, they kind of shut down and go on, see? Because they're not hiring friends. I say this all the time. They're not buying friends. They want a chiropractic service, and they want to be treated with respect and courtesy with good service. That's what they want. They don't want a friend. They want friendliness. They're not buying a friend. Okay, so that's the most efficient office. So you come in, the best case scenario, it's a real small waiting area, maybe just 2 chairs. That's it. And then there's a little counter reception area to sign in. You only want 1 hall, not 2 halls going around. You want the space down. You want it all open. You don't want it closed or like they shut the door. You walked into doctor's offices and the windows are shut. Never want that. This goes into systems recognition, appreciation, and approval. So right when they come in, it's wide open. New patients, they just get their information. They just sit down. They should only be sitting down to fill that out. That's it. A regular visit should never turn and go sit down. So then they go right back. Like, let's use a regular visit. They sign in, they go right back. And by the way, patients love it. They love it that they can sign in and walk right back. They love it. So they go right back. Typically, we go to the doctors and we'll have hot seats. Those are just hot seats, which are right next to the adjusting area. And they're trained in after the report of findings, that when they come in to go back here, go ahead and lay on the table. Doctor will be right with them. If both tables are full, have a chair here and he'll be right with you. Doctor comes over. This is when you learn to easily do the 1 to 3 minute adjustment. Remember, I talked earlier about the banks when they took down those walls between the tellers. What happened to people moving in and out of the bank, and the efficiency and productivity of the bank skyrocketed. They needed less labor, everything. Productivity increased, profit increased, efficiency increased, overhead decreased, all just because they took down those barriers. So they go in, they get adjusted. They go right from the adjusted to therapy. And right from therapy, they're out the door. And then you typically will have a couple areas, like typically right behind, and I'll go into the specific designs and layouts, but typically a nice situation is when you go in, there's a therapy on the left, there's a hall, and then on the left side, there might be a couple rooms. Typically, you want the doctor's station at the front, remember where 80% of the action happens, you want it at the front. So typically the adjusting and all that. So nice situation when there's a therapy behind the CA, or there's another office. And then we use multiple doctors in the same office. We just put a bench counter in there. I had 3 doctors in a 12 by 15 room. We don't spread out. And then, so kind of on one side, you have 2 rooms, maybe 3. It'll be the CA room, the doctor's area room, and maybe 1 or 2 exam report of finding crossover rooms. And then on the other side of that, you got the open hall. So, because remember that gives the perception of a lot of space, and then going all the way back, and then put the therapies against the wall, et cetera, on the wall. And we even put counters at the top of the therapies to put things on. Don't use tables don't use little table stands between the tables. You can seriously increase the efficiency. Put the tables against the walls if you do have tables, and then put a bench counter at the top. You can put everything on, but what you don't want is move them away from the walls and put things between the little tables between them. You could have easily put in, this just happened the other day. I looked at an office. I said, if you take out these little tables, put the chairs out, you can put 2 more therapy stations in here. You can go from 3 to 5. And just like that, you can go from 120 to 160, 170 visits a week with nobody waiting, just because of taking out the little tables between the therapies, pushing them put the end tables against the walls, and putting an L bracket bookcase shelf straight across you get from Home Depot, and putting everything on that. Just like that. That's how efficiency. So that's kind of like if you had your druthers, of course, they don't work out that way. A lot of times when you go in, you got to kind of look and imagine how you would space things out, or what walls you could take down, what could you open to put a therapy, all that kind of thing. So that's like a really good situation. And then in the back is the bathroom. And if you have an X-ray room, that's in the back. That's like a best case scenario. And that's really efficient space, unbelievably efficient space. So, and even in the doctor's room, you can make that a dual space where you can even adjust out of, uh, do reports out of, and that could just be one room. Again, you're back to a hybrid once you do that. So you could have the doctor space that you could still use for exams, consultations, report of findings, plus one other room for exam cons. It's always good to have two rooms. And, again, unless you're seeing 60 visits a week, but it's always good to have at least two rooms for consultation, report of findings, exams, things like that. So you can easily overlap the doctor's office space with another room. And then on the other side, you got the hall space. So you got 4 feet of hall going back maybe 10, 15 feet of now utilized visual space. And then all the therapy stations are on the right side there. There you go. And then you have the visual barrier, and then you have 2 tables there. See, that's like a really good layout for unbelievable high efficiency. I mean, you can do that with, again, a lot of this depends on the therapies you're doing, and I'll talk about that separately. But those are the 3 layout designs, the major issues between them. Remember, you're looking at space, labor, and equipment. The number one thing that's going to increase your overhead the most is space. Why? You'll go to fill it. It kills efficiency. The more you spread things out, the less efficient you become, the more labor you got to hire. There goes your overhead. Space, labor. So we pay attention to labor when we do our therapies. Now, we base our treatment on the science of the 3 phases of healing. So we just make sure we have therapies for each of those phases. And our therapy stations are only $150. That's it. We don't spend $2,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a therapy unit. That's why I say we can totally equip an office for only $7,000 with new equipment. So again, that's when you know how to do these things. So that's the best case scenario: space, labor, equipment. So you need, when you got the individual rooms, you got the worst space, wasted space, least efficiency, lowest profitability, highest overhead. Then you go to the hybrid. Well, things now you can come up. So your profit goes up, your efficiency goes up. Then the best space is the open therapy area combined with the open adjusting area. And the number one reason most doctors don't do the adjusting areas, it's usually low confrontation. And then they'll let the patient dictate. Well, the patient doesn't like to be treated in the open. Well, we already addressed that. You exchange them out for somebody who doesn't even know any better. Okay. You never let 2 or 3 people dictate and hold you captive to your business. You never do that. So that, if you can kind of visualize, open therapy bay, minimum of 6 stations, 2, what's optimal, at least if it's a single doctor, 2 adjusting tables. So when you're on one, patient can get on the other, have at least 4 hot seats there. They come right back, they get on the table or they get in the hot seat. You're only spending 1 to 3 minutes with them now. You're not talking about the ball game and everything else. They go right across over to therapy. Depending, again, this depends on what therapies you're doing, how much more labor intense. If they're not labor intense therapies, you won't need another full-time person. It's like we have one doctor, he's seeing 180 visits a week. He's got 1 full-time person. Well, all of his therapies, and they're the high-paying therapies, they're the rehab therapies, but they're self-done. So he teaches them how to do it in the beginning, and then they learn to do it on their own. So he saved a lot in labor and efficiency just by doing that. See, that's being smart, thinking about what you're doing, not just buying stuff randomly. Okay, so that's the difference. And then that's the highest. So you can have the least amount of space when it's combined open space and combined space. That's when you can have the least amount of space. So like I said, you can get away easily with 600 square feet easily if it's laid out properly with one doctor. And that's with even one staff member or no staff members. but you will need labor to get you past 40 to 60 visits a week. That alone will be your limiting factor. It won't be space, it'll be labor, because you can't answer the phone, schedule appointments, collect money, while patients are trying to come in and out. That eventually all that stops, and you have to hire somebody to leverage your time. So anyway, those are a lot of specifics about space and how to increase your efficiency. And so that's what I did. So I started in 800 square feet of individual rooms because I didn't know any better, but I knew I had to expand because people were waiting because I was growing my business. Then I went to the hybrid. I went to the therapy with the rooms. And then I went to the open adjusting, the therapy, the rooms, and then the individual rooms for consultations, exams, things like that, and the x-ray bathroom room in the back. And there you go. We went from me to 2 full-time doctors we'd see about 300 or 400 visits a week, something in that range. There you go. So that's the major considerations, is how the layout. Lock your doors, open the space up. Space is a killer. It's a killer of overhead, efficiency, profitability. It's a killer. Do everything you can not to expand your space. Don't have individual rooms. So hopefully that helps out. Again, I'm Dr. Paul, and you can check us out more. We have all this information on secrets of chiropractic success, how to start a practice, how to grow a practice. Again, what we teach is how to start and grow a practice, a highly profitable practice, how to create a freedom lifestyle, but learning how to hire, train, and manage associate doctors, and how to create wealth through real estate investing, tax strategies, and asset protection. Check us out at secretsofchiropracticsuccess.com.